Hello and welcome to Say Hi to the Future, a podcast aimed at highlighting the human side of ingenuity. My name is Ken Tenser, CEO of SpyderWorks, a leading business consultancy for mid-market organizations and entrepreneurs globally. With me today is Jason Haddock, CEO at SOZO Labs, a company that partners with amazing organizations to build bespoke, virtual, and augmented reality solutions, immersive apps, and gamification. Like this video if you enjoy our show and subscribe to our channel. Leave us a comment with who we should interview next. Thank you for tuning in, and I hope you enjoy the show. Jason Haddock, welcome to Say Hi to the Future.
Hi, Future.
Jason, AR and VR, augmented reality and virtual reality. First, tell the listeners what they are and what the differences are, because we're a lot of lay people that might be listening and participating today.
Sure, happy to. I think let me start with virtual reality and then I'll move on to augmented reality, because there are very different technologies, although they are starting to become, with the more modern headsets, we are starting to see them becoming a little bit more interchangeable. But if we just describe what they were in simple terms, is virtual reality is essentially when you go into a virtual world. So there's a completely digital world around you. You are essentially inside that world doing whatever it is that you're doing, everything from playing a game to learning a useful skill. Takes place with a headset on. It blocks the world out from around you, and you are completely immersed in this virtual world. And the cool thing about it is that the virtual world actually feels real. On the other hand, augmented reality is how we essentially take a lens to the real world around us, and that lens becomes essentially a digital layer on the world around us. So everything we look at essentially can have context. The technology can identify objects, it can identify places, it can identify QR codes, and then it can bring up some kind of contextually useful information about whatever you're looking at. And that's why predominantly today, we see virtual reality done through headsets that you put on your face, and augmented reality is still largely done through the camera on your mobile phone.
Right. So thank you for that. This is just sort of my own personal curiosity. When I think of headsets and I think of virtual reality versus real reality, if that's a thing, is there a time we're going to be able to put this headset on and experience the eye of a hurricane, like the full sensory? Will it move from a camera to a suit, if you will, and get a full sensory experience?
I'm quite sure someday we will get there. I think right now there's interesting, I suppose, applications of that process happening right now. So maybe not the eye of a hurricane, because there's like a lot going on there. There's like wind, there's furniture flying past your head, you flying. But if we take something, your fear of spiders, for example, and you put on a virtual reality headset, there is a lot of therapy being done around phobias at the moment, where someone is actually looking in the VR headset at a spider, and there is essentially a puppet or a kind of a dummy at where the kind of therapist will run it over the person's hand. Now, I don't know how that would technically be described as therapeutic, because I'd probably be, pardon the language, crapping myself. But I've seen some really interesting things done. And in fact, a project that I did was a project for a big engineering company, where we were essentially helping them almost do this Harry Potter sorting hat kind of thing, which is they had training for people who were working at heights, and they had training for people who were working on the ground. And what they wanted to be able to do was to be able to identify who was best suited to which type of training. And a lot of the challenges they had was probably to do with, fear that if you admitted you had a fear of heights, that you would be off the course, or even, something as unsubtle as the male ego, and like believing that it's not manly to admit that you have a fear of heights. But inevitably what happened is that they would find out, right towards the end of the course, that the person suffered from vertigo, and it would be an expensive exercise. Mm-hmm. So in order to test that virtual reality could actually be a technology that could identify vertigo, we did an A/B test, proper, honest to God research. And on the one side, we had what the A group, which was the people who were very bravely said, I laugh at heights, and the other group who said, don't even think about taking me anywhere near a height. And it was fascinating to see that the people who suffered from vertigo, even though before they put the headset on, they were standing in an office, they knew that they were in office, they were on their hands and feet by the time they got to the top of this blast furnace, and they could even feel the carpet under their hands. But of course, the most interesting part, and the reason I use this as an example, was that the biggest fans of the project were the engineers who were building a lot of the kind of construction and stuff at the steel plant. And they got so excited about this project that they ended up building an entire haptic rig for us. So you would essentially start on a platform, and the whole experience was you would go into this blast furnace and go up to 190 meters off the ground, and you would have to do some kind of logical tests to test your kind of ability to think at heights. And when you got into the elevator, they essentially built a vibrating kind of floor panel. So you would actually feel the elevator kind of moving underneath you. And then speaking of hurricanes, is when you got to the top, they would have these kind of breeze fans blowing into your face to give you that sense of, I'm standing exposed, at 190 meters, and I can feel the wind in my face. So there's lots of creative and interesting things that you can do to simulate that sense of reality. But I think right now we're still a long way away from creating that completely immersive haptic experience that feels a bit like the Ready Player One or the holodeck on the Enterprise.
Well, thank you for that. And I got to tell you, I'm not afraid of heights when I'm on the ground. It's amazing.
I know.
So I appreciate the example. So Jason, as you're talking through it, though, it's obvious that there's a real deep passion for what you do, for the field that you're working in, for the types of research you've been able to partake. So where did that come from? Tell us a little bit about your journey to today.
Well, Glenn, I'm glad you asked. I was born at a very young age. I've always been a huge fan of technology from when I was 8 years old, and I got my first computer, and I learned to program on this kind of really, really old school thing called a Spectra video. And I learned BASIC back then and was fascinated with adventure games. I've always been the guy who likes to push the envelope. You can imagine how well that translated into me being kind of easy to manage. But I would always try and break the rules and look at the next kind of greatest thing. And eventually I ended up in the space where I was the R&D guy. And I think it's always just been this absolute fascination with technology. And then what ended up happening along with that is this. I also realized kind of midway through my career, I had a real big fascination for design as well. And it should have been obvious earlier on, because I was always drawn to more of the user journey and the user interface, and I was less excited by the kind of back end stuff. And when I came across this technology, virtual reality, I mean, it was just really, really kind of interesting and exciting to me. It's kind of creating virtual landscapes to be able to, you just kind of take you on a journey into this kind of incredible world. And I'm a huge fan of storytelling, and I think that there's such great opportunities to create incredible experiences for people using this technology. and of course, the other side of me is the pragmatist. I'm the guy who likes to kick the tires. So as interesting and exciting as all of this stuff is, what also interests me is when things can really make a difference in people's lives and can deliver real value. Not a big fan of gimmicks, and I think one of the big challenges with this technology at the beginning is like any technology, the kind of the enthusiasts got hold of it and said it's going to be the next big thing, it's going to change everything, and we saw last year it had this big resurgence again, saying Web3, it's like, it's going to be immersive, and Mark Zuckerberg got everybody excited. I'm kind of glad it's subsided a little, and the hype has kind of now been replaced by ChatGPT and these large language learning models, because it gives us an opportunity to focus back in on the real value of these technologies. Mm-hmm. So I think that's my story is I absolutely love technology. I want to make a difference in people's lives, and therefore I want to try and achieve that by the intersection of kind of making a difference and using technology to make that difference.
I really appreciate that. And there's one thing I think you hit on that is really, it says a lot to me. And it's when you mentioned that you were glad that some of the hype, last year's hype, was sort of settling down. I have to say, I mean, as somebody who's focused on innovation, ingenuity, it's great to look for the next great thing. I mean, look, we have to. It's a frenetic world. We have to, but there's no perfection out there. There's no, this is the answer to all of our challenges or problems. So I keep reminding, and I just loved when you said it, that for business people, for individuals in their personal lives, there's no magic bullet, and stop hyping things as the answer to it. So appreciate that, Jason.
Yeah, look, I mean, I get, I'm like I said, I'm a bit of a pragmatist. So I understand the rationale and reason for it, and part of me believes that if people weren't hyping stuff, a lot of great ideas wouldn't maybe sustain themselves long enough to find their niche and to find the value proposition. Right. But yes, I mean, I guess the world is the world we live in, and people, there's actually, like, nothing wrong with people getting excited about technology and the potential it has. In fact, I actually welcome it. I think the challenge for me is just getting through that curve and being able to give people the value, like, to bring the value, because I mean, this technology, I think that it's suffered for almost a decade of struggling to find its place. I remember when I first started out in 2016, 2017, when the Oculus DK1 came out, and it was the start of that cycle. I was developing a lot of applications that were kind of one and done style applications. And it was quite frustrating. But if I hadn't gone through that, I wouldn't have got to the example that I shared with you, this kind of working at heights example. Mm-hmm. And I would never have seen or had the aha moment where, in 30 years of being a software developer, a software architect, anything to do with software development, I've probably been involved in some form or fashion. I'd never seen a product or a project earn a faster return on investment than that VR project did, where they had literally recuperated what they had spent on the project in total in the first 8 weeks, which was pretty remarkable. So I think there's great value. I do, but I also acknowledge I do get very frustrated when I go into LinkedIn and I see 400 posts on how to use ChatGPT effectively for this, that, and the other. So I'm not perfect. I'm just a man. I'm just, I bleed like everyone else.
There you go. You are also, though, the head of SOZO Labs. So talk to me about that. Talk to me about your company and what you're doing there.
So we're a small software engineering company based in Stellenbosch in South Africa. We're part of a large engineering group called AlphaWave, and they're probably best known for developing a radar technology on something called the Meerkat, which is a satellite dish that's used in the Square Kilometre Array, which is currently the world's largest satellite installation. It's in the Karoo. South Africa were very proud that they won that bid. So I'm surrounded by remarkable engineers, and what we essentially are trying to do is we're one of the, I guess, the kind of incubation companies in that group, and we are on a journey to try and I suppose find opportunities and find product opportunities using this immersive technology. And our current journey is that, what we believe is that there's something kind of has changed with specifically virtual reality in the space of education and learning. And that is that, we all love to learn through experience. Like, we learn to ride a bike when we're young by trial and error, and trying to avoid landing up in the rose bush. We learn to swim by, our dad throwing us into the deep end of the pool without our water wings. But yet, when we kind of carry on in the school system and in work, generally what happens is we kind of replace that experiential learning with more kind of rote traditional styles of learning. And it's always kind of fascinated me and made me a little bit sad at the same time, because I don't think I've ever spoken to anybody who hasn't absolutely had a passion for learning something. And that could be anything from, I'm not saying we like to learn compliance training in our company, but we all have careers and we all want to be successful at those careers. We all have hobbies and we all want to master those hobbies and be as good as we can. And we get excited by this. But yet, when it comes to the way that we learn, I think that's where something has gone wrong. I think the big problem there is we live in a three-dimensional world. Everything around us in 3 dimensions, and yet almost every form of learning today is a 2-dimensional form of learning. If we look at, that kind of, we all like to live, like we learn experientially and we live in a 3D world, then for me, the epiphany was that virtual reality is the first technology in human history that allows us to learn experientially in 3 dimensions. Mm-hmm. And all it takes is for you to put that headset on and you can be transported into a garage and learn how to replace the brakes on a diesel semi-truck. And you can essentially use the same muscle memory skills you would use, the same tools that you would use to do it in the real world. And I've seen countless examples of where people are more confident training in VR, where they train faster, and where you would look at 2 people, one who's learned from a textbook and the other one who's learned in VR, actually, performing the task that they've learned. And you'll take a look at the 2 of them side by side. The person in VR will essentially do the job probably 3 or 4 times faster than the other person. The other person will need to ask for a lot of help from the instructor. But not only that, you'll look at that person who's done it in VR and you'll say, sure, it's almost like they've done this before. And that's, for me, the power of virtual reality, especially in the space of learning and education.
So one, I couldn't agree with you more about the importance of continuous learning, education, moving it from 2 to 3 dimensions. Other than technical skills, is there an interactivity that we can bring to learn competencies, if you will, of speaking, of questioning, of critical thinking?
Absolutely. So we know that organizations around the world globally are now starting to kind of really feel this kind of heat of, we've talked about the future of work and what that means for a long time. And I think, some businesses have adopted it, but most have struggled with the concept, and some have even kind of just left it to later to worry about. But I think with the COVID pandemic, with the post-COVID kind of pandemic, and the world trying to reset itself, and people kind of pushing back and going, wait, no, we're not happy to go back to the way we were before. Things have changed now. We need to kind of embrace that change. We've started to see that the 2 most critical skills in my opinion, that have emerged is adaptability and mastery. So how adaptable are we at learning new things, changing to the responding kind of emerging world around us? And how quickly can we get to that level of mastery where we can be really efficient and effective at those skills that we've acquired? And a lot of that boils down to confidence and the style in which we learn. So where I think, large language models and AI and especially this kind of concept of narrow AI, because I think a lot of people are trying to present this kind of big hype thing that we've now invented, artificial general intelligence. I've read a few books about what would happen in that case, and I can tell you none of them end well. But I think with this narrow AI, what we started now is to start to see the emergence of a blending of different technologies and how they could work together. When you talk about those kind of skills like critical thinking, communication skills, and those really, really critical skills that we need to learn for this future of work, I think that virtual reality especially presents a really, really interesting and powerful way to help you train these new skills. And the reason is that I think, we've just finished an internal study where we've gone to 80 different companies globally, and we've asked them, how do you train soft skills? And more than 2/3 of them are still doing predominantly classroom-based training because it's hard to teach people soft skills with e-learning. Mm-hmm. And there are a lot of people who try and blended approaches, but ultimately, let's unpack that. So how do you learn soft skills? So generally what will happen is you'll go to some kind of soft skills training expert, and they will essentially give you the foundational kind of theoretical skills of how you can do these things. And then they'll do certain kind of activities like role playing. But, having been in many of those, they are so hard to get right because one is you've got an immediate challenge of scale. To be able to learn a new skill in that way, the classes have got to be really small. Or otherwise, it's just impractical for that expert to spend quality time with everybody, building that confidence up. Mm-hmm. The second issue is you've got a limited amount of time. So you often don't get the opportunity to build mastery and confidence. So you come out of the other side of that thing knowing the skills, but not necessarily ever having implemented them or used them in the real world. And that's why, we say virtual reality is going from role play to real play. And it's about building confidence because you can now have virtual reality experiences using this blended technology of virtual reality, AI-driven animation, text to speech and speech to text, with kind of almost like the missing part is this ability to have a semi-intelligent conversation, not with another person, but with someone who could almost take on that role playing, the other side of the role playing. And you do it in such a way that, you're in this VR headset and you're not sitting there in front of 20 other people who are on the course who are all watching you kind of doing this role-playing thing. It feels incredibly anxious when you're sitting on that stage and you've got all of these like spectators watching you. And most of the time, I think we don't end up taking it very seriously or feeling very, very anxious about the whole experience. And you don't learn well when you're anxious. So now you have all these technologies in this VR headset, which is a safe space to learn, and you can do it as many times as you want to feel as confident as you need to. And that's why I think it's going to be a foundational technology in the future world of work and helping people build up these critical skills by essentially getting us to mastery faster so that you don't have the situation I had early on in my career when I became a manager and I had to do my first conflict resolution meeting. And I realized about 5 minutes into the meeting, I had no idea what I was doing and I was completely out of my depth. Now we could look at ways of actually building that confidence before you even step into the room.
That to me is so critical. I mean, in the work that we do as well around innovation, ingenuity, and helping people learn how to resolve wicked problems more quickly. There is so much of that gamification, live gamification, if you will, interspersed. And I love the notion of being able to prep people prior to the meetings and to break down some of those barriers. So thank you for sharing that, because I would love to learn more about our own applications at some point. So there's one of your projects called Work Active. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Absolutely. It's a gamification based project, and it's still in development. So I've obviously got to just be very careful about how much
Sure.
I kind of give away about the customer. But essentially, it's a corporate wellness solution that's looking at essentially some interesting problems. Is how we can get people to understand the long-term implications of sedentary behavior. So we all, especially if we are in desk jobs, we spend a lot of time sitting in our chairs, and there are long-term health implications to sitting in your chair all day long. And the even bigger challenge is, I think in Canada and South Africa and UK and a lot of kind of Western style countries, we generally have move past this kind of, and I'm using this kind of very carefully, this almost this industrial age kind of thinking of, if someone's not in their chair, they're not working. And we've kind of like moved into the knowledge economy and understand that work is work happens all the time, whether we're in our chairs or not. But there are certain cultures which are still very entrenched in that style of behavior, especially in the East, where you have Japan and Korea, and these cultures are still very much like driven by this, this kind of belief that if I'm not at my desk, the boss is going to judge me, and I need to be seen to be working all day long. So the challenge we've been presented in a nutshell is, how do you get, one, people to understand that they need to get out of their chairs more often, and two, to be able to kind of override those cultural norms. And that's where we're trying to use this concept of gamification, which is, I think a lot of people misunderstand that, because they might say, well, what do games have to do with that? And I'd say, for me, gamification is less about games and it's more about understanding human behavior and how humans essentially are motivated. And that's the challenge. So we're using a whole bunch of different types of levers, everything from understanding that people are motivated both negatively and positively. So some people need to feel like, they're missing out on something, or their competitive kind of gene needs to be kind of massaged a little bit. Other people do it because they understand the long-term implications. I mean, it's why diet apps hardly ever work, right? It's because we all want to be thin and skinny and kind of like look like the Mr. Universe that we imagine in our heads. But the reality is we don't get there, because it requires a lot of discipline, a lot of hard work, and part of helping people to navigate that is through this idea of extrinsic kind of rewards and intrinsic rewards. So the intrinsic reward in this case is, I want to be healthier, I want to look better, I want to kind of make sure I live a longer, healthier, better life. The extrinsic rewards are the little dopamine hits along the way that kind of sustain us long enough until we actually start to see some change. And then we suddenly look in our mirrors one day and realize, oh, this is working, and those extrinsic rewards are as critical, and they can be anything from, the kind of receiving rewards, recognition, even something tangible, to basically, anything you can imagine really that would give someone a dopamine hit. And this is kind of I think what we're trying to do in the Work Active project is to build a solution that's going to help this customer to make their customers' employees healthier.
Jason, it's been an amazing conversation. It's incredible how time flies, but my head my mind space going in, and I think a lot of the listeners, you hear AR, VR, and you think it's going to be a pure technology driven conversation. But what you brought out is so critical to all of us. The journey, learning, education, mastery, and the fact that gamification is about understanding human behavior. Because really, for me at least, AR, VR, and technology in general are just ways to address those with a new tool in a different way. So I've really appreciated those insights. But before we let you go, if you have a couple of minutes, there's something that you're doing that I just think on a human level is just incredible. The notion of the virtual field trip and improving the quality of life in hospices, those in frail care and probably beyond. If you can tell us about that, because it's just a wonderful notion.
Yeah, so we are looking at doing virtual field trips at the moment, and this is one of the benefits of virtual reality is anybody who can afford to travel should. I would strongly recommend it. I've been very blessed that I've gone and seen many places around the world, but it's not something that's available to everybody. And sometimes the places that we want to go and see are also not accessible to people for a number of different reasons. And what we've essentially started doing is looking at this idea, specifically one of the prototypes that we're busy building is a field trip for, I would say, kind of grade 6 to 8, maybe even as high as grade 10, is to be able to go and see what this installation I mentioned earlier, the square kilometer array. Mm-hmm. And it's to be able to, one, drive this passion in science and technology. It's really been driven by a very, very frightening statistic in South Africa. I think we're in the bottom 3 countries globally when it comes to our science grades. So there's a real need for this type of solution. But the idea would be to essentially educate people on what's happening in the Karoo with the square kilometer array. And because of the sensitivity of the actual radar satellite dishes, you generally can't go in to see this for yourself. So they do have opportunities for schools to go and spend some time going into the learning center there. But for many schools, it's an arduous thing. Even for affluent schools, it's a tough thing because it often involves 1 or 2 days out of the school, because the teacher has to go up, has to do the prep, all the kids have to go up. It's often anywhere between an hour and a half or 3 hour drive for a lot of these schools to get there. And for less affluent schools, it's just completely outside of their their budget. So this experience is essentially going to put someone right at the base of one of these satellite dishes and being able to see just how big the magnitude is. But it's also going to be instilling their that kind of magic and joy of understanding our place in the universe, and understanding the engineering and mathematics and history that's gone into radio telescopes and astronomy, and I mean it's big stuff, right? It's where we fit in the universe, and this is really what the square kilometer array is trying to answer for us. And we get very excited about very large spaceships blowing up. As the recent news will tell us, that's a good thing. But this is a way for people to experience being, in person in that space and looking up at this satellite dish that's, kind of multiple stories high, hearing about Galileo and how we got to this point. And I think it's a combination of that ability to take us on a journey, that ability to kind of stoke our passions, because we, historically, for like many decades, STEM subjects have been problematic. People,
Right.
if even today, we're seeing lots, like more and more people, not following, just not being passionate about STEM subjects anymore. And I mean, when you talked about all the types of people that it could be relevant to, I think that you're absolutely spot on. Is anybody who is, kind of stuck anywhere from a school child right the way through to someone who is in a nursing home, being able to have this capability to be able to transport you somewhere in the world, I think is absolutely powerful. And I mean, we're not stopping at the field trips. I mean, the idea is actually to bring a real science lab to the classroom. I mean,
Very nice.
when you consider how much a science lab costs, it's anywhere. I'm trying to just do the math in my head, trying to transfer South African rands to Canadian dollars, and I'm coming up short. So I'll transfer it to US dollars. It would be anywhere from about probably $25,000 to $50,000 to build a science lab, and
Right.
then probably I'd say about $2,000 to $5,000 a year to keep that science lab running and to stock it. And we've seen the situation with some science labs where they are so budget constrained that they will have some of the chemicals that are so old that you can't use them anymore, but the science texture would like jealously guard them because it's my precious, so in virtual reality there's no limits to supplies. You drop a beaker, it breaks, who cares? It's just digital, it's like virtual, right? So
Right.
and the part that I love most is just the end goal is to create the sandbox, is to create the environment where people can experiment and play, and you never know what comes out of that. We've heard incredible stories of people who would never have had access to something before, or kids who would never have had access to technologies having access to something the first time, and something remarkable having happened because they just happened to be a phenom or like really brilliant, but you would never have known about it before. So in many ways, this is bringing really expensive technology, really expensive equipment, and really incredible experiences to more and more people. And a VR headset nowadays is quite significantly cheaper than a mobile phone. So it's starting to become really, really accessible.
Jason Haddock, CEO of SOZO Labs, Cape Town, South Africa, also Stellenbosch, South Africa, if I understood correctly.
That's it, yeah.
Not too far away. Thank you so much for sharing your work, your journey, and the impact on learning and mastery of skills. It's just, it's a future in a frenetic world. So thank you for joining Say Hi to the Future today.
Thanks, Ken. It was great to be here.